Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back after a 3-week break. I hope you all had a good Yontif. Since 3 weeks, quite a lot has happened, and certainly we've progressed. We're now in a much rosier situation than we were 3 weeks ago. So let me jump straight to the screen. As per usual, I'm going to take you through the epidemic curve where we are at the moment. And then I'll go on to the situation with the vaccine or vaccination, how we're progressing with vaccination, and then lastly deal with some of the questions that you sent in. So yep, we've certainly come out of the third wave now. Just looking back, this certainly was the most severe wave, particularly in the Gauteng province, I'll come to just now, and also the longest lasting of the wave. So look at this epidemic curve. This lasted, gosh, about 130 to about 135 days, as different to about 75, 76 days for the first and second waves. But yes, we have certainly come down nationally, and just looking at where we are with some of the other parameters, which give us assurance that we are out of our third wave, and we are at an interwave period at the moment. So the test, or first of all, the number of tests has reduced quite considerably, but more importantly, the test positivity rate of 3.6% is one of the lowest, again confirming where we are between the waves. So let's look at Gauteng, the most severe of the third waves. And just looking back, we were more than double the peak of the second wave, 76,800,000. But let's go on the more optimistic side. We're right down to baseline over there. In the Jewish community, again, Gauteng, come down markedly, not totally, completely zero. We've had, in the last week, the week ending the last Sunday, 15 new cases. There's also been a bit of an outbreak in one of our schools. So yes, we are at a low activity, but it doesn't mean that there's no virus activity. There is some virus circulating and some illnesses being reported. The other provinces also, so nationally and all the other provinces, yes, the Western Cape coming down close to zero, close to the baseline. The Eastern Cape, again, similarly, and KZN. Let me get the other pointer up. That's better. Also coming down. All right, so this is where we are now at the interwave period. There's we are now. And waiting for and anticipating our fourth wave. Now, if it follows the same kind of cyclical pattern, we can then expect that the fourth wave will come about, I guess, at the end of the year, the December holidays, unfortunately. But that's if it does maintain the cyclical pattern. There are so many variations that it makes it so difficult to try and predict when, that's if we go on these cyclical patterns, and also how serious it's going to be. Human behavior is going to kind of be one of the big factors. As we know, there's the election with a lot of large gatherings taking place now. There's also the rage, which is going to, we set off the second wave, and it's apparently also taking place now. That might affect the fourth wave. And also the big unknown is, will there be another variant? Now, if everything goes well, then we're hoping and we're trying to be optimistic that the fourth wave will be quite a bit less serious than the third wave. But again, there are some of these unknowns, and we'll just have to wait and see. All right, so now let's look at how are we progressing vaccination-wise. So total doses just over 18.25 million doses of vaccine have been administered. That's the figures up to yesterday. Total individuals who've been vaccinated is 13 million. So we're edging close to a third of the adult population have either been fully vaccinated, in other words, had received 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson or 2 doses of Pfizer, or partially vaccinated. And this is a breakdown between the fully vaccinated and the partially vaccinated. But about close on the third now of the adult population have seen the vaccine, and just over 1 in 5 of the total population if we also include children. So we are progressing, but unfortunately, more recently, there's been a bit of flagging off of the vaccination drive. As many of you might have listened to the state president's family meeting, they're trying to kind of boost it up with the augmented vaccination on the weekends, the so-called VUMA project. But the normal weekday vaccination is still falling well under the 300,000 that we'd like to get to. We need just under 200,000. But maybe we could be augmented with this weekend drive, the Friday and Saturday drive, because really we need to get something like 250,000 per weekday dose per day if we're going to try and get to what's about 70% adult vaccination coverage by the end of the year. The different provinces are, again, some doing quite a lot better than others, as you can see from this graph over here. There's the Western Cape, but more probably better to look at the actual figures themselves. Now, if you look at the total individuals fully vaccinated, Gauteng comes out tops with 2.2 million. But if you then translate that into as a percentage of the adult population, Gauteng ain't doing so good. We're in fact the second lowest proportional to the population. The best, in fact, are proportional population are Limpopo, Eastern Cape and the Free State, and the Western Cape coming slightly behind those three. And there we are in Gauteng. So again, we need to kind of pull up our socks a bit to try and get a greater vaccination coverage. What is fairly good news, and I really want to point this out, is when you look at the distribution per age group. The most vulnerable, of course, being the 60-plus age group, the one which is going to be more likely to get more severe disease, hospitalization, and so on. There, the coverage has been pretty good so far, about 60+% coverage in the 60-plus age group. But again, some of the provinces, the more intense the green color, the better coverage. So the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo doing pretty well. But the Gauteng, Northern Cape, and Mpumalanga, not quite so good. Somewhat less than the 50 age group, about 50% coverage. It's easy to remember these figures, actually. And then, of course, the younger age group who've only more recently started vaccination, they still need to catch up. But this is really what's more important. This is really what we're really looking at this stage. Also, what has improved is the gender distribution. If you recall from our last presentation, in fact, 3 weeks ago, twice as many females and males were being vaccinated. And now the males, the gents, have caught up. So it's more or less about the same gender distribution, and particularly important, of course, in the 60-plus age group, where it's more or less the same. Now, again, just to emphasize the importance, the critical importance of what vaccination does, because vaccination is really mainly geared to reducing hospitalization, reducing more severe disease. I have shown this before, but I think it's worth repeating again, that vaccination, individuals who are fully vaccinated, their risk of being hospitalized is 10-fold reduced. The risk of mortality is 10-fold reduced by being vaccinated, and even the reduction of infection, somewhat less, of course, but even then is 5-fold reduced by vaccination. And we're actually seeing already this being shown. Again, I've shown this picture last time, but again, I want to emphasize it, that in the Western Cape, even the cases, only 200 out of 2,400, 8% of cases are on vaccinated individuals. But even more striking and more important, hospital admissions, only 4% of hospital admissions were in vaccinated individuals, and less than 2%, 1.7%, died of the individuals that died of COVID were vaccinated. So these are, I think this very strikingly shows how important vaccination is. But what I also do want to just end off this section talking about vaccination is again to emphasize that where we are, I showed this last time with our first generation vaccines, and I want to repeat it again, is that the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the wearing of the mask, the physical distancing, the avoiding of of large gatherings, sanitizing hands, those are still obligatory. We still need to have that to augment what we are achieving with vaccines. And again, I showed this last time. If we do away with those non-pharmaceutical interventions too prematurely, as what happened in Israel, we see there that they had a major upsurge in cases and even a major upsurge in hospital admissions and deaths. These, of course, were mainly unvaccinated individuals, but of course, they were infected by people that had been vaccinated to a large extent. The virus is still circulating in the population if we start lifting those non-pharmaceutical interventions too soon, too prematurely. I also want to mention another very important aspect. Vaccines are extremely important, as I mentioned, as I keep on emphasizing. But however, there is one exceptional situation where vaccines may not be as effective in preventing infection, and that is where you have a super spreading environment. There have been a couple of outbreaks. I just want to use this one as an example. This happened a couple of months ago in the Barnstable County, Massachusetts, where they have a lot of these cultural get-togethers. They have large public gatherings. This was reported by the Center for Disease Control in the Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report. In this outbreak, that population had a relatively high vaccine coverage of 69%. Still, they had 469 cases. Of these 469 cases, 346, or 74%, were fully vaccinated. And of the 346 cases, 273, that's 79% of the cases, were ill, so were symptomatic, were ill, despite being fully vaccinated. 5 cases were hospitalized, and 4 of those 5 were fully vaccinated. So what I want to point out that in a super spreading environment, we have people coming together, large gatherings, parties, functions, particularly in closed spaces where there's poor ventilation, then in fact being vaccinated, you're almost as susceptible as being unvaccinated. So I think the important thing really is to try and avoid these things, to keep up with the non-pharmaceutical interventions and try and avoid the super spreading environments, even if one is vaccinated. So again, to re-emphasize, there are 3 aspects which we need to look at in terms of controlling this infection. Vaccination, extremely important, as I mentioned before. Natural immunity, individuals that have been infected do retain some degree of immunity. I'll come to somebody sent out a question. I'll mention that again just now. And very importantly, we still need to keep the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the wearing of masks, the keeping of physical distancing, the avoiding of large gatherings, and sanitizing hands. So I'm going to leave the slides and now go on to the questions. And again, many thanks for sending questions. Let me first start off with that question related to what I just spoke about. Somebody asked, what is the immunity after having had COVID infection? Well, certainly people do develop antibodies. But it's interesting that the actual virus itself produces a very good immunity. We're not sure how long-lasting it is because it's still relatively early days. So you're not sure how durable that immunity is. But certainly people are protected to a large extent. Nevertheless, if you've had COVID, we still do see people getting second infections, in some cases even third infections. Now, the vaccine has been modified to give an even more powerful immune stimulation to the immune system of the body to generate protective immune response, even better than the natural infection. And therefore, people that have had COVID should still get vaccinated. And in fact, if you've had COVID, you're actually in even a better position because your natural infection acts as a primer. It educates the immune system. When you subsequently get the vaccine, that then boosts that immunity. So vaccination still is mandated, even if one has had COVID, to get the best immune response. Another question came in, the scientific difference between a single-dose vaccine and a 2-dose vaccine. And what's the protection after each dose and why? Okay, so the Johnson & Johnson has been designed to be a one-dose vaccine. The vaccine, in actually constructing the vaccine, has been purposely modified. If you recall, one of my previous talks, I spoke about the part of the virus that attaches to the cell that's infected. It's called the spike protein, and it's the receptor binding domain of that spike protein which attaches the virus onto cell. The reason I'm mentioning that is that when they've designed both vaccines, the Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson, they've actually stabilized that protein, which normally disintegrates when the virus gets into the cell, but they've stabilized it to remain intact and therefore augment the immune response. So with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they've even gone one further, and they've instituted a mutation in a certain part of the life cycle of the virus, which again stabilizes it and makes it more strongly stimulating of the immune response. So the Johnson & Johnson will give you a very good immune response, and they've measured up to about 6 months or even longer than that, up to, in fact, more studies, even up to 9 months, retain good, durable, strong immune response. The Pfizer also modified strong immune response after the first injection, first vaccination. Again, a very good immune response. You're well protected, but there one does need a second priming dose, the second boosting dose after the primer to kind of get the best immune response. So even after first dose, you're partially protected, not fully protected with Pfizer, but you do need a second. Of course, the question about boosters in Israel, they're giving third doses. It's quite a contentious subject. There's at the moment no good scientific evidence that a booster dose, a so-called booster dose or augmented dose, is required either after the first dose of Johnson & Johnson, the one dose of Johnson & Johnson, or after the dual Pfizer dose. It hasn't yet been established. And at the moment, we're not recommended except for two circumstances. The one circumstance are people whose immune systems are suppressed. People who's undergoing transplant recipients, people on cancer therapy and so on, because their immune system is suppressed, it's lower, it's depressed, there a booster may well be required. And the second situation are the healthcare workers, because of the high risk that they're involved, and we do need to secure our healthcare system before the coming fourth wave, the fourth wave. And in those situations, there may be a place, but otherwise, at this stage, there isn't really a need or recommendation for a booster beyond the one dose of Johnson & Johnson and beyond the 2 doses of the Pfizer. And then there is also just to kind of also follow on what I was mentioning before about the immunity after having COVID. I think again, just to emphasize, yes, you do need to be vaccinated after having the infection. And then lastly, somebody sent in a question that we do need to publicize vaccine effectiveness information to persuade vaccine hesitant people. Well, you know, those slides I showed just now, I think are pretty kind of powerful messages of the value of vaccination, the extreme importance of that. These are very, very effective vaccines. And they're also very, very safe vaccines. These are vaccines which are probably safer than virtually all the other vaccines which you have now, either which we give to our children or occasionally which are used for adult vaccination. Vaccine hesitant people really need to be get good, authentic, scientific, evidence-based information, because unfortunately through social media, there's a lot of kind of false information, myths, truths, conspiracy theories which are going around. So really, I think everybody that has had the vaccine should be an ambassador to those people that haven't yet been vaccinated, to say, look, that didn't hurt all that much, might have had a little bit of mild feeling out of sorts for a day or two afterwards, might be a tender arm or a slightly painful arm for a couple of days afterwards. But now you've got the gift of being secured from against severe disease, and to a large extent also mild disease. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. All the best. Have a good day.